And so on the 12th of September 1939, the First Supreme War Council met in Abbeville to discuss how to fight. The plan was to delay and to defend and to build for a major offensive in 1941 or 1942 via Belgium to win the war. But the German army, after its victory in Poland, is desperately short of trucks. Against Poland, only 15 out of 54 of their divisions had been motorised, and German infantry was crippled by too many designs. They had 131 designs of truck. Now, few Germans owned cars, so few knew how to drive or had any kind of mechanical skill. Spares were rare, complicated by the vast number of designs. By the end of the Polish campaign, the German motorised forces were falling apart. They also lacked trained troops. They had 1.1 million trained troops, 0.7 million reservists who were partly trained, and 1.7 million First World War veterans. Despite that, on the 27th of September, Hitler demanded an immediate offensive against the French. The army is horrified. It was short on ammunition, vehicles and spares, and a lack of training had been costly against Poland. And a third of all the German tanks were Panzer IIs. The artillery was horse-drawn. The German armed forces were nowhere near as good as their propaganda machine had suggested. The BEF, on the other hand, was small, and the British intended to keep it that way. Their aim was for 55 divisions by the end of 1941, including 14 from Canada, South Africa, Australia and New Zealand, and 4 from India. But it was to be the best equipped and most mobile in the world, fully mechanised. They would use machines, not men, what they called at the time a robot army. The SMLE was the best rifle in the world, capable of 30 rounds a minute, compared to the German and French rifles' 15. They had an excellent anti-tank gun, the 2-pounder. It could penetrate 50 millimetres of armour plate at 2/3 of a mile. No German tank had more than 30 millimetres of armour plate, and British tanks were broadly good for the time. The Matilda II had incredibly thick armour. British industry was also gearing up for a long war. In March 1939, 16 new weapons factories had begun construction. In December, another 29 started to be built. Now, Gamelin wanted Britain to send 2 armoured divisions to France to make up for the lack of French armoured divisions. Instead, Britain sent 5 regular army infantry divisions and 8 territorial army infantry divisions to France. Now, they knew they were to be the junior partner, so accepted overall French command. Lord Gort, the commander-in-chief of the BEF, accepted that he'd be commanded by the French C&C of the northeastern frontier. Now, Lord Gort was a brave soldier. He'd won the Victoria Cross in the First World War, but he was, to quote, the kind of Englishman who, while accepting foreigners as a regrettable necessity, finds foreign touches wholly repugnant. Now, despite this, he actually got on well with the French generals. Unlike the French generals, when he was told, who really didn't like the British army, and when the French general was told he had to command the BEF, he broke down crying, which was hardly a good sign. And on the 17th of September, the U-29 U-boat sunk the British aircraft carrier Courageous, the first British warship to be sunk. On the 13th to the 14th of October, the German submarine U-47 sneaked into the British naval base at Scapa Flow, sinking the battleship the Royal Oak, a huge shock to the British Empire. But the U-boats didn't have it all their own way, and 3 U-boats were sunk in October, and 6 more by the end of 1939, but even so, it was a disaster for the British. Now, Hitler still pressed on for an immediate military assault against the French. General Halder, the Chief of Staff of the German Army, and von Lieb, commander of Army Group Centre, and Beck, Halder's predecessor, start to plot to assassinate Hitler. Dönitz, meanwhile, starts to concentrate his U-boats into hunting wolf packs. Now, he believed that he could starve the British if he could just sink 500,000 tons of merchant shipping every month. However, since 1937, the British government had been offering grants to improve farming to reduce imports in the event of war. The government in September has started to issue new tractors to farmers to allow for an increase in the amount of productive land, aiming to have 1 million extra acres of ploughed land. They'd actually stockpiled these tractors before the war. They knew that it would be politically difficult to build large numbers of tanks before the war, but they could set up the factories to build tractors and then put them aside. And of course, they knew those tractors would be useful in the war, and if you can build a tractor, you can build a tank. So it was actually quite good long-term planning. Now, at the outbreak of war, the British only produced 12% of their own wheat and 9% of their own butter, and they aimed to improve this. By January 1940, the government introduced food rationing to further reduce imports. Now, on the 17th of November 1939, at the Supreme War Council, the French suggested landing British and French troops at Salonika in Greece, or maybe Istanbul in Turkey. They'd find these troops from Syria, Palestine and Egypt. The aim was to prevent any German moves into the Balkans and to bring the Balkan countries into the war against Germany. The French believed that Yugoslavia, Greece, Turkey, Romania could raise 100 divisions to fight the Germans. The British believed that all this would achieve would be to bring Italy into the war. On the 21st of November, Britain finally blockaded Germany's exports as well as all their imports. This was to be devastating to Italy. 70% of all Italian coal came from Germany via Rotterdam. Italy was forced to negotiate for resupply. The British offered to sell Italy coal of their own, and 15% of Italian coal already came from Britain. But Mussolini refused and stopped buying any kind of coal from the British. This caused an absolute crisis in Italy that now wasn't getting British or German coal. In November the 30th, 1939, the USSR invaded Finland. Now, initially, Finland does well, and the British and French public opinion is strongly behind supporting the Finns against the Russians. Now, as Germany was receiving a lot of economic aid from the Soviet Union, France also decided that it was a good idea to attack the USSR. Now, Britain is also interested heavily in the conflict, but that doesn't mean that the British are keen to fight the Russians as well as the Germans. Now, Germany is also, however, the British are aware, heavily dependent upon iron ore from Sweden. Now, in 1940, Sweden would send 12 million tons of iron ore to Germany. The OKW, the German military, said that the Swedish iron ore deliveries are a basic demand of the Wehrmacht. Now, during the winter, the only way this Swedish iron ore could come to Germany was via Norway. And so it comes by the northern port of Narvik, which is critical. Only in summer did the Baltic open up to allow them to just ship the iron ore across the Baltic. Now, the British decide they're going to help Finland, but to use the British troops in Finland to cut off iron ore imports via Narvik. Churchill, as now Lord of the Admiralty, also wanted to mine the sea routes around Narvik to stop this iron ore getting to Germany. In favour of this, it would really hurt the German war effort. The cons, however, is that Sweden and Norway might stop selling iron ore to the British as well, and Norwegian merchant ships in protest might stop working for the British government, and it would mean a loss of the moral high ground. And so the British government consider it, but Chamberlain rejects the plan to mine the waters, but did consider sending an expeditionary force to fight the Russians on behalf of Finland. And so we're not fighting the Germans, but we're keen to fight the Russians, it appears. In December, there's the Battle of the River Plate in South America. 3 British cruisers hunt down and sink the German pocket battleship, the Graf Spee, in an incredible naval victory. After this, the British and French reach a financial agreement. The British would pay for 60% of the war as the richer of the two nations, France 40%, to reflect the differences in national wealth. But still, the British and French do nothing against the Germans. In January of 1940, the Graf Spee's supply ship, the Altmark, is captured near Trondheim, and 299 British prisoners of war are released, but it's done in Norwegian territorial waters. Norway says nothing about the Royal Navy breaching its sovereignty in this way. We also have, critically, the Mechelen incident. It looked like the Germans were going to invade Belgium on the 14th of January. The French concentrated their army near the Belgian border to rush into Belgium to help. But the Belgian government protested, and so the French army withdrew. The Belgian government then sacked their chief of staff, Van der Bergen, for being too pro-French, fearing that he would anger the Germans.